Baruchim Aboyim, good evening, and thank you for coming. Class today will be, I think, on a very important subject, one that affects relationships and a great part of our lives many times. We're going to talk about anger and what I would call a destructive fire for the most part. It's interesting, the Rambam, by Maimonides, gives us advice about life, and his advice is, in all situations, take the middle road. And if you take the middle road, you'll generally be going in the right direction. Except for two things. Never get angry, and never be arrogant. Be calm and be humble. And that's the extreme. And really, it's interesting because when I look at it, anger and arrogance are really, I think, one and the same. Why do people get angry? Basically, I think because of arrogance for the most part. You did that to me? So if you're humble, I think that you have less chance of getting angry. And if you're arrogant, you have a much greater chance of getting angry. It's basically a dangerous, and it's a pure emotion. Because it has no boundaries. Once you get angry, then really all rules go out the window. You say things that you may not really mean, do things that you would not normally do. You lose a sense of those around you. There's no embarrassment of either what's happening to you or what you do to someone else. When generally we have restraints. But I really think that it's a personality trait, in the sense that some people never get angry. But it's not because they're under control. It's because they're colder people. Things just don't affect them. So for a person like that, the fact that they don't get angry is not necessarily an attribute. It's a personality trait. And not always a good one, in the sense that they should have maybe a little more passion. People that are hot, emotional, they may get angry a lot. But if they can channel that, then they do have a certain sensitivity. So it's not black and white, so to speak. What are the benefits of getting angry? Headaches, digestive imbalances, insomnia, anxiety, depression, high blood pressure, skin problems, eczema, heart attacks, strokes. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention states that 85% of all diseases have a strong link to your emotional state. Other experts believe the real percentage is even higher. So what do you gain by being angry all the time? All of these things. It's interesting, we look into the Torah, the instruction manual that I mention all the time. And the Bible tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, got angry 3 times. And what's interesting is Moses, the greatest prophet that ever lived, when he got angry the 3 times, he forgot the law. The 3 times he got angry. So we see even an elevated person handling anger is not necessarily an easy chore, an easy task to deal with. There is one time. The Torah, the Bible mentions one case of what we call righteous anger. And that's with an individual called Pinchas. Pinchas kills Zimri, quickly the story where he has relations with a Midianite woman in the camp. And Pinchas is incensed by this act. And in his anger, his righteous anger, he kills the 2 of them. Now, what's very interesting is that this act, which we call righteous anger, and the only act of righteous anger mentioned in the Torah, strangely enough, is mentioned at the end of one portion of Balak. And the beginning of the next portion, which is called Pinchas, is where his reward for the act of righteous indignation for God that he did is rewarded. Which is strange, because they really should have either both been at the end of Balak, or in the portion of Pinchas, should have began with this act of vengeance for God that Pinchas did, and then his reward for doing that act. Yet we see that it's at the end of one portion, we take a break, so to speak, and begin not just another chapter, but a whole new portion in the Torah of the Bible, to talk about his reward, and not everybody was quite sure that what he did was the right thing to do. It took the mentioning of what we call a bas kol, a heavenly voice, that had a call out from heaven to say that what he had done, what Pinchas had done, had quelled God's anger. And therefore the plague that was in the camp that killed 24,000 men stopped because of the act that he had done. So what he had done was the proper thing. But it's the only time where anger was called righteous anger. Now, many times, it's not that we don't begin with the thought of righteous anger. There are times that what bothers us is actually correct. But it's difficult for it to stay righteous, for us to not involve ourselves, to not make it personal. A person can be motivated, but you have to find some way with a clear head to be able to do it. One of the problems with anger is that, again, it dominates, it takes over. It takes on a life of its own. That anger, that fire that burns within you, makes you suffer. That's where people get ulcers from. Because there are really two types of anger. There's internal anger and external anger. Internal anger means I'm angry at you, but for whatever reason, I can't tell you. Either I'm too timid, you may be a superior position that I can't afford to say what I really want to. Whatever it might be, so I internalize that anger. And again, ulcers. That's what eats at a person. So from the inside, he starts to deteriorate. He really weakens himself. And it's interesting, the Torah tells us very very precisely, do not hate your brother in your heart. That if you have a problem with someone, don't approach them when you're angry. Anger is contagious. It's like, I always tell my employees, if you smile at someone, they smile back. If you're stone-faced, they want to know what's wrong. But if you're angry at someone, the tendency is for them to come back with you with that same anger. And they don't even know why you're doing it, and they don't care. You've approached, why? And the same tone, the same level comes back at you. It's almost like playing tennis. It's serve and volley. As hard as you put the ball in, the ball comes back at you, if not with the same speed, even more. And so too in the personal communication that we have with people. When you come at someone with anger, right away it turns into an angry conversation. And then there's external anger. Sometimes people actually let it out. They don't leave it inside of them. They actually express it. And the problem becomes that if you're an angry person, and if I know that every time I say something to you, you're going to come back at me with anger, then the truth of the matter is what I start to do is not say anything to you. I just agree. Why? Because I don't want to argue with you. And not only that, if I argue with you, the truth of the matter is you're so busy being angry, you're not listening. You don't hear anything. What's the solution to that? The solution to that is don't ever approach anyone when they're angry. If someone comes at you when they're angry, what you really try to do is either walk away, which doesn't always work. Sometimes that just gets them angrier. But to try to at least calm it down. And whatever their problem is, even if you have to agree with it temporarily, it's like a hot pot. If you pick up a hot pot, it's going to burn you. If you deal with them when they're angry, it's going to burn you. If you can push it off, hours, or preferably days, and then deal with the situation, cooler heads prevail, and all of a sudden you're having a conversation instead of having a shouting match, where the truth of the matter is he who shouts louder is the winner, which has nothing to do, that's might makes right. But the sad part becomes is people with strong personalities many times never hear truth, because people just become so overpowered by what they do that why should I bother saying anything? Because if I do, he's just going to yell and scream. And why do I want to do that? It's just easier to agree. So in the end, it's funny, my father-in-law was, I thought, a henpecked individual, and I really didn't have much respect for that. As I've gotten older, and being married 45 years, I think he's a genius, because not everything's worth going to war for. You don't have to decide on making everything that goes down in a marriage exactly perfect. And that's it. That's another point. The truth of the matter is we strive for perfection, but we don't get perfection. So you don't have to go to war for everything. You really need to pick your battles. If you're going to be angry all the time, what you're going to wind up being is an angry human being. And that anger is not going to affect others as much as it's going to affect you. It's really going to destroy you and your relationships. It's either going to destroy you internally by you eating yourself up, or externally by the fact that no one's going to want to be around you. Because it's no fun being around someone who's angry all the time, someone who's judging every little thing to decide whether it's right or wrong at such a high level of volatility. Now it's interesting, very interesting. God gets angry. It says in the Torah there are 5 descriptions of God's anger. Now we know that God really has no form and no being, and he takes the traits upon himself so that we can identify with them. But v'yicharaf Hashem, we know that Torah describes God's anger at the Jews in the desert, even at Moshe. What does that mean? God really gets angry? I mean, you can get God angry? And the answer is no. When it describes these 5 descriptions of God's anger, what it really describes is a distancing that God has from you. So when God is angry, he takes a step back. When you continue to anger God, he takes another step back. So the anger of God puts a distance between you and between God Almighty. When a person reconciles with God, he brings God closer. So then he has a closer relationship with God. And it's really the same thing with people. When you are angry with someone, what happens is there is a distance between you. And the more you get angry, the bigger that distance becomes until you're really separated. And so too with God. So the anger that God has, so to speak, is also something that we can identify with. Now, there is this time, and it's very difficult to do, but anger can be a tool. When I was a young child, 60 years ago, back then, rabbis would slap people. And don't do it today. You'll have legal battle on your hand. But back then they did. I remember I was the captain of the safeties, and I was in the office, and this rabbi, a young man, came in and got the rabbi, I thought, pretty angry. The rabbi slapped him across the face. And the boy left. And I said to the rabbi, I said, wow, he really got you angry. And he said, no, he didn't get me angry at all. He said, had he have gotten me angry, I wouldn't have slapped him. He did it as a tool. And as we know, save the rod and spare the rod and spoil the child. Although I really believe you shouldn't hit a child with a rod or a belt. Hit the child with your hand. Feel the pain. Because this way you may not overdo it. I'm afraid that if a person uses a staff, so to speak, or a belt, it may be with too much energy. But the key becomes is you can act like you're angry if you're not, and have someone see that you're displeased with something. And it works with employees, it works with children. And that act of anger, but it has to be an act. You can't get into it, because then again you're losing control of that emotion. But all things, there is no such thing in life that is pure good or pure bad. It is how we use it. So again, for the most part, we stay away from anger, and always when it's emotional. If you can use it sparingly, but in a way that's positive, by all means. But know that the person that suffers the most when you get angry is you. And what a person needs to do, preferably, never get angry. And if you're that type of person, just work on it. 2 things. A, to get angry less, and B, that when you get angry, let go of it. Let go of that hot pot. Don't keep holding on to it. And again, you will benefit, and all those around you as well. And God bless. Let us hope we have control of who and what we are in a better way. And have a great Shabbos. Thank you for coming.